All right, thank you. We have to wrap up now, but just before you go, you look at when you left the Ministry of Solid Mineral some years ago, and you look at where we are at, because we're talking about Nigeria beyond the oil that we have. Solid mineral is supposed to be one of those things that we should be exploring and exploiting. Where do you think we are, and what will be your final word on what we should be doing to make sure that solid mineral becomes one of the mainstay of our economy?
Frankly, it would be good for us to develop solid minerals, and that was what my reform in that sector in those year in that year that I was there was all about. We've got some 34 classifications of solid minerals, so it would be great to develop them. And I think that the framework for that sector was already laid, and we actually had the key policy reforms and institutional reforms, and we already were attracting the interest of the big mining corporations. But of course, policy inconsistency, and I know that many of them said they simply couldn't, they found new locations. That's the way the global capital works. But my point of Nigeria beyond oil is not so that we can replace solid minerals with oil. I'm just not comfortable with us looking at natural resources as being the definition of us as a nation. We are much more than natural resources. I'm interested in how we can institute governance to at least enable us. The advantage that natural resources gives to us is that it gives us, if we managed the resources well, much more scale of resources for the investment that we need to do. But there are key issues in policy orientation. I am interested, for example, in how the government can focus on structural transformation of the economy. And so I know, for instance, that China, light manufacturing industries in China will soon become totally not competitive because of growing wage in China. Salaries are increasing. And so there are certain kinds of activities that China would not do competitively. And so those opportunities, 85 million jobs, are going to be looking for destinations where they can come. Nigeria can essentially prepare itself, prepare its mind around the industrial policy issues in a way that does not repeat the mistakes that we made when we thought of some of the very grandiose industrial complexes like the Ajaokuta steel mill. We can't repeat those mistakes, but we must be thinking of how to enable manufacturing, entrepreneurship to take foothold in this nation. And it is about innovation. It's about creativity. It's about thinking in terms of the human skills and the human capital. And so for me, a strategy that looks beyond natural resources, but perhaps looks at natural resources as the means of expanding the scope of investment that you need, because you need to build your logistics and your infrastructure, including the power you were referring to. But you also need to have the right kinds of skills. You need to have the right kinds of legal and policy systems and institutions. And I think that it is urgent. We contribute 2 million to the 9 million children that after college have no jobs on the continent. That's a time bomb. We have to act in a way that shows that we know that this is a matter of urgency. We don't have time. That's just the issue.
Issue of human capital development. Do you think Nigeria is poised to actually develop its human capital based on what you said earlier, that the people are the asset of Nigeria?
It's it's pretty emotional to talk about the development of our human capital, because one of my toughest assignment was getting to the Ministry of Education and seeing for the first time that we had been completely reversing all our gains that we had perhaps in the 60s and the 70s, when our education, and also the 80s. I mean, I left secondary school in 81 and went to college in 81, went to university in 81. And I still believe that we had a good enough kind of opportunity to get the best education, because it took me very far, the education that I got here in Nigeria. Then when I went as Minister of Education in 2006 until I left in 2007, and took all the diagnostics, all the key indicators that would reveal to you the state of the education sector. I just couldn't hold it. I couldn't hold my emotion because it was terrible. And nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. The only thing that I know is that in seeing some of those terrible indicators that showed how poorly we were doing, for example, I asked that I be given the 10-year performance of our students in the West Africa examination. And when that was given, it showed that over the period of 10 years, we went from levels of 67% of children passing with 5 credits, including in English and mathematics. And as of the time I was looking at this, it was now something in the neighborhood of 26%. And I thought, this is terrible. So almost 74% of our children have been failing year in, year out, and it really didn't mean anything. That's not where to be. Today's global economy is a matter of competitiveness. And so if our children, the bulk of our children, are failing regional examination, how are they going to compete with the rest of the world? And so the issue was that the education sector that I saw, I called it a dysfunctionality. We went ahead to begin to propose a number of solutions that looked at the issue of education governance, looked at education financing, the role of technology in education, looked at issues of quality, instructional materials, looked at the issue of teacher quality, looked at curriculum, looked at entrepreneurship. We looked at the issues of physical facility for education. We looked at the whole works and gender issues and equity issues in education. All of that had solutions on the table. Now, what manner of policy inconsistency would make a country not build on the solutions that it has? And it just is amazing. But as I speak to you, I know that the fate of this nation is going to be determined with how well we're able to enable the over 60% of children that are continuously trapped in failing public schools. How do we improve their learning outcomes? There was a certain study that was done, and when it showed that only about 20-something% of Nigerian children actually come out with learning outcomes in reading, to the extent of their peers. That's worrisome. We have to do something radical, and it's got to be root and branch.
We've got to do something radical. Thank you very much, Dr. Obi Ezekwesili. We can go on and on because there's still so much ground we haven't covered. But time is not our friend, and all we have to say is thank you very much for joining us on this segment. Dr. Obi Ezekwesili, who is Senior Economic Advisor, Africa Economic Policy Development Initiative of Open Society Foundation. Thank you very much for being with us.